totally necessary. You guys want a bunch of old tools? Like old crosscut saws and all that kind of stuff?
Probably not, but it depends. We have a lot of old planes and crosscut saws and hatchets, and
You're on.
Okay. All right. Well, welcome to the May 3rd regular meeting of the Durham Planning Board. First step is roll call and determination of agenda. We do have a quorum. Mr. Tyler Hutchison, Ms. Juliet Kaplinger, Mr. Alan Purinton, and myself, John Talbot, along with the town planner, Mr. George DeBarge. Step number 2 is, do I have a motion to accept the minutes from April 5th?
we'll make a motion to accept the minutes from April 5th.
I have a motion, second, then a second. Any discussion? Seeing none, all in favor, please raise your hand. 4-0. Moving on to informational exchange on non-agenda items. Town officials, Mr. DeBarge, if you would like to.
Yes,
Talk to
as you and I discussed before the meeting, John, we did meet with the select board about a couple of weeks ago to discuss the concept of an ordinance committee and the possibility of getting a group of representatives from each of the groups in town, the Planning Board, Board of Appeals, Conservation Commission, and Historic District Commission. They're involved with the land use ordinances in various capacities and aspects of it. So they were, and John, I'll summarize it, and you can give them your perspective as well. But what I think where we came out of it was they had concerns about the formation of a committee, primarily from the standpoint of the select board involvement. And so we had met with the town manager earlier in the day before the meeting, and John and I and Jerry kind of threw around some ideas. And where we came out of it was a modified concept of having a summit, a land use policy summit of those groups, rather than forming a regular committee or even an ad hoc committee. So just once or twice annually, get those groups together to discuss the ordinance issues. You know, what are they looking at? What are the comprehensive plan recommendations? And then hopefully get a consensus of the policy groups of a direction to head for the limited number of amendments you can deal with over a year. And the select board made pretty clear that they want the planning board, not themselves, but the planning board to take the lead in the process in terms of deciding what to put before them for consideration on town meeting warrants.
Yeah, I think that's a great synopsis. They are very clear that we, the planning board, would set the agenda for that stuff. So the summit, it's a fancy name for it, but the summit would be just what conservation and historical and Board of Appeals, what parts of the land use ordinance do you see? You know, so there's a section there about historical. There's a section about the resource protection was a great idea. There's a section in there about the Board of Appeals. Are there things in there that you see need to be changed, or is there just something else? And then the planning board would kind of say, okay, conservation wants to talk about prairie grasses and cemeteries, but we don't, and I'm not picking on them, but just something like that, or whatever it may be, but we don't want to do that. I will take our ideas, so the things we kind of come up with this evening that are priorities for us. And then, what hopefully this will help with is there's only the resource, and probably the long pole in the tent is George and George's time. And so, you know, it'd be nice to take on really lots of stuff, but the reality is some things are, I thought roads was harder than it had to be, but roads was relatively easy this year and not a lot of time involved. But if you get into big ticket items like affordable housing, and if we try to do affordable housing and resource protection and backlots or, you know, some other big thing. So we just set the priority on what we want to do in the coming year. And then that would also be an opportunity to say, Conservation Committee, would you be willing to take on resource protection? You kind of remember last year, we did it where let's ask the conservation, they stepped to the plate and did it. This is an opportunity for them to say, no, we don't think that solar is the biggest issue. We'd rather see us work on some other topic that I can't think of off the top of my head. But so that's kind of the goal of that meeting, simple meeting. And then we'd come back and then George would do kind of what he did last year, which is start putting ideas, firming those up. That would then go into the same process we had last year where we get something put together that we discuss as a planning board, or if it was resource protection, the conservation folks would get something drafted up. They would take it to the public information meeting, bring it to us. We'd review it at the public hearing. So I think probably the same plan we did last year in affordable housing. That's probably more of just the planning board. We just do the same process. George would write something up that we'd all look at, work on, throw him some ideas to write it up, and then get together in the fall, have that first public information meeting, get the word out there like we did last year. If we wanted to do a survey or whatever else we wanted to do, with the goal of having the official public hearing after the first of the year before the town meeting. The challenge is that, and I'm open for discussion when we get to that point, is on the timing. I think 2 of the 4 select people were very interested in moving quickly and getting affordable housing done and approved as soon as possible. I'll throw out my opinion now. We can discuss about it. I don't think we should hard subjects or challenging subjects. I really think need to go to a town meeting. I think a lot was gained at the lead up to it with information, public hearings, and then there are good things that come out on the town floor. Even if you don't get an agreement, at least people have had their public opportunity to speak. So we can kind of talk about that schedule. So that's what I gathered from that meeting. And so I guess I would be the chair would be the president, the chair of conservation, the chair of planning board, George.
Board of Appeals, Historic District Commission.
Yeah.
Just from
historic.
the town manager management side of the discussion, I think part of what Jerry is looking at is efficiency of time use. And so, my primary responsibility is to provide technical assistance to the planning board. However, I can provide technical assistance and have done so for the Conservation Commission and the Historic District Commission in the past. And my ability to do that is really directly related to how efficient the process is. So what I don't have time for, good evening, with my limited hours, half time, is to waste time on a process or a product that's not going anywhere. Mm-hmm. And so the more in sync the groups are, like we saw in this past year, the more I can do. But if we're spinning our wheels and you do a lot of work on one issue, or Historic District Commission or Conservation Commission, Board of Appeals, and then you come in after 3-4 months of my research time in working with a group, you come in and it all falls apart. That's what we're trying to avoid. So the idea is to get discussion with the groups up early and get a direction that everybody at least understands the direction. It may not all be completely in agreement on what it's going to come out as, but at least in terms of these are the issues we're going to work on, and this is who's going to be doing it, and have as clear guidance as you can.
So, yeah, and so I think the selectmen were clear. They didn't, I think they would see their role as similar to what it was this past year, where they came to our October affordable housing. They came and they spoke their voices as either selectmen or private citizens, so that we don't get off on a track that they're not supportive of. But again, we would keep them informed of the processes we're going forward. As soon as I say that, we don't have, other than Deer Creek, we don't have a busy agenda ahead of us in terms of.
You just did it.
What's that?
Not necessarily.
As soon as you say it,
Don't ever listen
the
to what I'm
floodgates will
saying.
open, right?
But anyway, we don't have a lot of projects coming up now. They probably will be 3 of them in the file tomorrow, but, so that's kind of what this is all about. And we can go ahead and finish input from others, and then get into Deer Creek and then the other stuff.
Sorry, John, can I?
Yeah.
I think I got a little confused with all the suggested meetings. So to summarize, it's saying that planning board takes the lead and we hold a meeting with the heads and maybe one other member of all the groups to come together
Yep.
and just say, this is what we want to
Yep.
think about for the ordinance for the coming year. We generate a plan between, say, the top 3 ideas, which we've decided as a larger committee.
Yep.
Then in 6 months or whatever, we all come back together again and say, this is what we've got. What do you think?
We would probably be, if it was affordable housing, we would be the planning board.
Yeah.
Kind of like we started last year with affordable housing. Conservation, the way they did resource protection, they did that. Of course, George was active in assisting them with that, and we had input, but they do the informational meetings, and it doesn't really come back to us. That's a possibility. It doesn't come back to us until the Board of Appeals. They want to do the same thing. They want to rewrite their rules, and I don't know enough about them to say what they rewrite, but if they said, hey, we can't do this, or we're supposed to do this, but it's really not our business, that's really planning board's business or selectmen's business, so we need to change the land use ordinance.
Can we, in going with the making it most efficient, can we, the initial comment, keep it to like our governmental emails back and forth so people know what's going to come up going in? Rather than, because I just worry that if everyone comes into a lot of different groups coming into a nebulous meeting, then we talk about one thing accidentally for 2 hours and nothing happens.
Yeah, I guess I would control the flow on that. It's a one-time meeting. I mean, maybe I'm misunderstanding, but that summit would be just 4 of us, 4 committees plus George, plus I'd like Jerry to be at the first one to say this is a town idea, not a planning board idea.
In the select board perspective, he would.
Yeah, and he would bring that as well. But then we would let's just say we chose the 3 that we want to do, which we've talked about doing, which is affordable housing, solar, and cell.
Mhm.
So we, the planning board, would take on affordable housing. We may ask the Conservation Commission to take on solar. And then we would take on the cell tower as an example. And so we would not be overly involved in theirs. George would start writing stuff up. And I think he said it's possible to have something drafted, rough draft, and that for our June meeting. And so would not be a lot of extra meetings until we get to like the informational meeting we had last October. And then the public meetings. And my goal would be to not have, what do we have, 3 or 4 public. Hopefully, lesson learned is let's get this thing to the point where we have 1 public hearing for all. It'd be nice if it was all 3, or maybe it's just 2. But we had 1 public hearing. We got that out of the way. We handed it off to the selectmen and say, I guess they have to write the article first. So we do the informational meeting. We say, this is what we think the article should be. They would say, yes, we're okay with that article. Then it comes back for a public hearing, correct?
Yeah, and just in terms of your question specifically about setting an agenda for the summit, or whatever we're going to call it, and just before Juliet, you wanted to say something, I'm sure. But in terms of having a clear path as opposed to it's all over the place, I think what might be helpful is for the planning board to create a list of issues as you understand it, and then present that to them and say, what do you think? As opposed to coming in, here's what we've decided.
Exactly.
You want to give them the opportunity. So for examples, here are some of the issues. And a lot of it's, and part of my concept for it was, you go through a town meeting and you come out, some things pass, some things fail. And so the question is, where do we go from here, like we did with the resource protection? So for example, in the vote on the resource protection, some issues came up. Those issues were particularly, what about the requirement that you have to go to the Board of Appeals or the Planning Board to do an expansion of an existing residential property? And we kept saying to the public, if there's a question of where the boundary is, the Board of Appeals will make that call. Now, the Board of Appeals in the past has expressed concerns with being put in that position. So we could clarify with them. And if there needs to be clarification in the ordinance, and so one of the ideas that you folks discussed at your last meeting for giving relief to people that are now put into the resource protection is to change that rule that says you have to go to the planning board for a conditional use to add a 30% to your house, go to the Board of Appeals for 50%, and bounce that off the Board of Appeals, because it's in their part of the ordinance, and say, what do you think about that? If they're in agreement, then you folks are in agreement with them. I have clear direction for drafting something and can work with them over the summer to get the final version. That's kind of the concept, I think.
And if, good point. If that became the priority, changing that rule within the Board of Appeals section, we may drop cell towers as an example.
Or it may well be that you can still do the cell towers because they are taking the lead on that.
We should very well do that. But again, I don't know. Well, I don't want to have a whole bunch of extra meetings. I think the long pole in the tent is your time.
Yes,
not
yes. But
our
again,
time.
if everybody's on the same page and if we do it efficiently, that gives me more productivity.
Sure.
So a couple clarifications or confirmations. One is Jerry would be representing the select board, or at least be able to.
He would be able to give feedback in terms of what he has been told or is hearing from the select board on
Because
issues.
the one thing that we don't want, and I think we heard this last time, is us going forward on something and then it getting to the select board and then
Right.
being like, what is this?
Yes.
We don't, that's why we wanted them involved. So if he can.
Yeah,
out
and as
there.
John indicated earlier in the discussion is that, it's important for the groups to keep communications with the select board going during the process.
So how do we do that though, if they're not?
2 tracks.
Okay,
Okay, so John goes to the planning, the
Okay.
select board meetings and does kind of a
So-
monthly report.
okay.
I provide the town manager with weekly reports, telling him everything I'm working on,
Right,
and he reports that to the select board.
okay.
And so I think it's
Yeah, I
important,
forgot about
and we
John
can do
doing
that.
Well, and I think that I wouldn't say it didn't work well last year, but I was doing that, George was doing that, but I think there was still, we're on TV. So,
Some pushback.
there was, it kind of got down to what I thought was the too late point. And I said that at the select meetings, if we're in a direction that the select board does not support, speak now, speak now, like in October, November, December, before we hand you something that you're.
Oh, even before that, right? Like.
Yeah, so if we do this summit in early June, we would get consensus of the groups. This is the direction. This is what the planning board is going to be working on, historic district is going to be working on, Board of Appeals is going to be working on, Conservation Commission is going to be working on. Report that. I can draft up a quick report to the select board, then provide that to them.
Okay, so we're running on the budget year,
Yes.
post the meeting, post the town meeting.
Yes.
It's not January, it's.
Yeah, and
April,
there's
May
been some
through-
discussion about that on a
Yeah,
budget
but it does make
standpoint.
sense to do it that way for now,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah, well, I think it's good to come out of the town meeting with we came out of last year's town meeting with resource protection as having failed, got blown out of the water.
Yep.
And so it was something we took on and brought to a conclusion, or maybe there's still some tweaking that needs to be done. But yes, and then, if the selectmen, if we say, okay, we've elected to do affordable housing, solar and cell towers, and they say, we don't think cell towers is important. We could then get back and say, we're not going to be, that part of the input is such that they don't want to take that on. Because I think they have a lot of it's the term I want to use, a lot of influence on what they need is, they're the elected, we're not elected. Nobody on any of these committees is elected, so they're the elected officials of the people leading up into the town meeting. I think they were receptive to providing feedback.
Couple other thoughts is that, okay, so you could start out with 8 issues and then go into the summit and it gets whittled down to 5.
Mhm.
And then you go through the process, and at the end of the summer, going into the fall, when you're going to start your process, you may say, okay, look, these ones, if we're going to go in this direction, this is going to be big. So
Mhm.
let's put those 2 of those 3 on hold. Do the 3, carry the 2 over to the next year. And again, start the summit right after the town meeting and say, okay, we carried these cell towers over.
Mhm.
Is that still the priority? Or are we going to do that this year? So it's kind of a moving process.
Okay.
Yeah,
Oh, no.
No, go ahead.
Because I've got, okay. And so with the planning board leading this process, it is going to be, more of your time, but also more of your time as well.
go ahead, I'm sorry.
We'll be planning somewhat the summit and the topics before to go into it, but also the meetings, the public hearings, and so like kind of we're in charge of all of that. Is that what
Right.
Yep.
Okay.
The actual public hearing, we're the only ones that can hold a public hearing,
Right.
so.
And then I think this is my last question. Nope, I have 2 more. We had talked about the 3 topics last time.
Mhm.
Are we thinking of, doing a summit next month
Yes.
and bringing these topics in?
Yeah.
Just, okay.
Or anything else that comes up that,
Right.
if we decide tonight that cell towers isn't important, let's talk about the 50%, 30% is our recommendation, or we can have those 3 plus that. Because the planning board, or the appeals board may just say, we're not touching that. We like it the way it is. We don't want to do that. Historic probably has their ideas. Conservation may say, yeah, there's solar panels isn't our thing, but some, I'm not picking on them, but frog crossings is. And so,
Okay.
and
And
I
then,
don't demean this Conservation Commission.
are we going in on this, into the summit with the comprehensive plan, kind of as our, not model, but
Well, I think it's the policy
yeah.
palette for the whole town
Yeah.
and all the issues.
Okay. I had
You know-
heard, my mom is a realtor somewhere up on mid-coast, and I know where I mean somewhere, but she said she's been hearing a lot about like the state coming down on towns that aren't following their comp plan. That she's hearing rumblings about that. I don't know if you've heard anything like that. We are. I mean, I'm not
But
saying we're not.
We're not one of those towns.
Right. But I would just the importance.
Well, the state can't really come down on towns about
Or maybe it
comprehensive.
wasn't, maybe it was more like towns that don't even have one. Like
Wow,
they're supposed to
that's
have them and
No,
the
no.
base.
It's a
Bare
strong
minimum.
recommendation from the state.
Well,
that we
it's an
have
issue of are your ordinances enforceable?
one.
And certain ordinances like shoreland zoning, subdivision, they stand in the law on comprehensive planning specifically says you do shoreland zoning whether you have a comprehensive plan or not. If you want to do certain if you want to do zoning, you want to do a rate of growth ordinance, you want to do impact fees, you have to have a certified comprehensive plan or you can't do it.
Okay.
So that's how it works. And the state has been pretty clear about, I think what that feedback is probably about this affordable housing law
Yeah.
as opposed to comprehensive
I think all of this is
plans.
coming, right? It's all related. And so
Yeah.
everyone has their eyes on it. Okay, cool. And then affordable housing, are we talking about that later?
Yeah,
Yes.
that's
Okay.
on the
So I'll
agenda.
leave that.
Yep.
Thanks.
You're welcome. So that is town officials. Anything else?
Yep, that's it.
I don't see any residents and non-residents. I don't see any of those. So continuing business, Deer Creek has asked for to be tabled. They're still waiting for the Corps of Engineers permit. No details where it is or why not or when it's coming. So I think tonight we have to vote to table, to approve their tabling it until next month. So I would gladly take a motion to table.
So moved.
I'll second that.
It has been moved and second. Any discussion? If not, please raise a hand if you're in favor of tabling. 4-0, we move on, and you'll let those folks know if they're not watching us on TV. So other business, this is where, Juliet, to your point, we talk about, what do we still, the three that we've talked about, kind of maybe where we are on affordable housing, I think we obviously spent a lot of time last year, on that. And since then, we postponed it until we got state guidance, which we have in fact gotten. Quick and dirty, I've been kind of trying to figure out if any of these delays or, there's a couple of law votes out there. One is delay for 2 years. One is delay, I think, until October and exempt towns the size of Durham. 665, which is a 2-year delay, supposedly had a workshop or a committee meeting Friday. I don't know what the results are, but I think at the end of the day, they've got maybe 6 weeks to do something or not. I mean, it's if they want to impact the July 1st start. So we probably need to start working on it a little bit, and then see if we have 2 years or 2 weeks. 2
So,
months.
so is that the decision? The either October or 2 years, or is it July or?
Well, if Bill 665 postpones it to July 1 of 2025.
Okay,
That's all it does, is gives 2 more years to do it. 214 says, okay, we'll postpone it, I think, till October, and we're gonna exempt Durham sized towns,
okay,
10,000 or less.
okay, but neither of those could pass.
Neither one can
Neither of
pass,
those,
yeah.
then we're back to July.
Yep.
Correct.
And then, but if one of those passes, and so we have no idea, who knows?
I don't know, where, I read some of the testimony on one of them, and there were power players who were in favor of delay. There were power players who don't want to delay. Let's drive on with what we've got. Affordable housing in general is too important to delay. Others are saying, you didn't do this well, state. You didn't put out your guidance until recently, and so we need more time to implement. So it could be changed to a year. It could be, I don't know. I mean, I don't have a feel for.
So what do you think we should do?
Well,
What should we do here? I know. I'm
again,
asking.
how I look at it, you got a 1-year shot at doing this, one time a year, typically. I mean, you can do outside of that, but basically, and I've said this again many, many times, is that my clock is town meeting, summer, spring, the rest of the spring and summer is time for research, for policy preparation. From Labor Day to Thanksgiving, early December is the public participation process. And then from New Year's to town meeting is the final leg of it. So in my view, you can't wait through the end of June until the session ends, and then they can't change it to start working on this, because I can't lose that time in terms of the first part of the research. So, and regardless of how it comes out, the town's going to have to deal with it at some point. And so, and I look at, you could think, well, we wasted last year because at the it got pulled off the town meeting, but we've made a lot of progress on this
Yeah.
since we started.
Yeah.
And John heard during the one of the public inputs for DECD, there was a gentleman from Durham that was complaining about, the idea that it's going to be delayed because they're ready to build and they've got real needs. And, he was harping on the state not getting their act together in a timely fashion. And then when it came to criticizing towns, he defended Durham as an example of a town that has really worked on this diligently, but the state has undermined our efforts. So that's why I'm saying, both from the standpoint of being responsive to the needs of the community, as well as recognizing how long these things take, I advocate pushing forward. And then if it pauses, then you can deal with that.
What about regardless if it passes or not, or if it gets taken? What if small towns are omitted? Regardless of that, like it's in our, like we talked
Right.
about, it's in our comp plan.
Yep.
Not exactly what the law is right now, or the draft law is, but like,
Pretty close.
yeah. So, just wonder about that, right? Like drafting something to fit the law,
Right.
drafting something that, I don't know, if harsh isn't the right, you know what I mean? Like something that would fit our comp plan.
Could our
Or
comp plan to meet the needs of the state requirements at the
so
same time.
both,
Hmm.
something that we would just, so if we're omitted, if our town's omitted, we could still keep going.
Yeah.
Right, so that's the goal.
Yeah, it says you're not required by law to do it, but you can do it.
Yeah, so
Yeah. Good.
about that. All about that.
Well, I think George is right. We start it now. I think one thing that would be useful is if it, either way, if it is obviously, if it's July 1, 2023 effective, we, as I said, we assume some risk, vulnerability, whatever, that until we pass our own town ordinance, we live with the state law, which that may be the final solution anyway, but that's, so I don't see that as a huge risk in terms of 50 people coming in, or, I mean, I would be surprised if it was more than 10, but I've been wrong lots of times. So we accept that risk because but I think starting it and we get George draft something up and then we'll know hopefully know very quickly in September, October, we have an information meeting and the pitchforks come out and say, no, we absolutely don't want to make it easier to build here. And that is the clear consensus of the town. We stop. If it's 50-50, we keep going and see how it comes out on the town floor as we tweak it and all those other things. So if that's, to me, is kind of what, what is the consensus here about going forward? What is the consensus as we get into the fall and say, we don't have to do anything because we're under 10,000, we're exempt, don't do anything. If that's the town's consensus, we drive on with that. But I would hope we'd ask that question very early is, we're going to do this, it's no longer required, we're going to do this. And that's, I would assume or hope the selectmen would weigh in and the other citizens would weigh in. But I think turning George loose to start and kind of tweak, well, I guess that's what we want to ask is what do we want? If we're going for, let's just assume we have to do something, what do we want to do? What kind of guidance should we give George? We had 3 options last time. And so George can go ahead. He's got some stuff he's already worked on and his ideas of getting this started. But is there any more about the general plan?
Nope. That sounds good. I think Anne, we scheduled some workshops, right? I think having Anne part of this.
Well, we haven't, and I guess.
Or
So what we
we talked
discussed
about it.
was if we got an open agenda for the regular meeting, do it at the regular meeting.
oh, right,
If you like
Right,
Deer
right.
Creek is ready next
Right,
month,
right.
then we do a workshop.
Correct, right.
And I think one of the things we have to watch as a member of the budget committee is that long pole in the tent is George's salary.
But I do think that when we go to the summit next month, that this is critical. Like for one of these,
Sure.
right? Like, I mean, I think,
Well, it's what you're going to work on. So
right,
what they're going to work on, if anything, is up to them.
Yeah, but I think that's one that we as a group, we push. And I think the selectmen are behind. I don't think anybody's going to come in and say, expanding whatever is more important than affordable housing. It's one of those, at this point, we have no choice.
it's almost given us the catalyst to go
Yeah,
forward on this,
exactly.
right? Like
Yep.
it's in our comp plan, whatever it's gonna look like. But I do think Anne, she's got some ideas and we have what we did last year but I don't know if we're gonna talk about that tonight.
Well, I think what we
I
should
can
do.
give a brief response to it. I did in the agenda notes a little bit.
Okay,
But
Yeah, I mean, I think maybe some of what Ann was talking about the meeting we had a couple of months ago, George is considered we still have 3 options, which are pretty broad. I mean, they probably cover all of the options, all the possibilities, and we can hybrid something. I mean, if we like one, but we want to add this requirement to it. So if you don't mind, let's get George, he
Yeah.
can start cranking on the thoughts he's already kind of put into it. And then we can discuss what after he's done and say, man, we just don't want to do that whatever it may be, that doesn't make sense. And giving him that guidance to get started now, I think is important.
So what I'm going to cover is, I thought it would be helpful to just look at where we were last year and where we ended up. And then now the state, what they've said. And then, so now that they've finalized their rule, and I did print out for you tonight, in the packet is the final rule. And this one that I printed out for you tonight is highlighted because they didn't in the final rule show what changes they have made. They provided a list of the changes. So what I did was I went through and actually compared the language from the earlier, the draft version to the final version, and I put in, here's what changed. So I can either let you go through that, or I can go through it and explain it. And so let's just make that a possible discussion point tonight. I just want to let you know that that's what that is. I also printed out a communication from Ben Averill of the DECD. And I've been in discussions with him about the concept of the hybrid that I discussed with you last month, where you would go with the comprehensive plan recommendations and limit it to accessory apartments with a 2-acre lot. And you would apply an area 2 acres per lot per house unit if they go with full-size units. And this email says he thinks that concept would satisfy the law.
Did you hand that out, George, or would you?
Yeah.
I printed it. It's one of the, should be right.
Oh, I gave you back, no, I gave you back my packet. thought
I have
had
an
it.
extra one here.
I've got it.
That's it. That's it. Yep.
Yeah,
So we
sorry,
can,
put
like
it
I
on
said,
that
we
packet.
can set that on the side for right now, and I'll walk you through a more general view, and then we can come back and look at it in detail if you'd like to. Okay? So what you see before you is the comprehensive plan recommendations for housing and the general policy recommendation. And again, the comprehensive plan has recommendations for natural resources, for transportation, for economics, all the different areas. So housing, as Juliet said, jumped to the front because of the new law. And it's very consistent with what the comprehensive plan had recommended, which is to, since the growth district was the only place you could do multi-units, with the elimination of the Southwest Bend Growth District, the comprehensive plan recommendation was to consider allowing 3 or 4 unit development under strict circumstances. And it also recognized the growing industry of tiny homes. And the state has passed a law similar to this one, telling you must allow these in your community, wherever you allow a single family home that's already on the books. And then the third area was to recognize that there's a really arbitrary distinction between a duplex and a single family, and that you add another half an acre. It's like with the resource protection. I would have a hard time explaining to someone why they need an extra half acre for a duplex, 2.5 acres. So the comprehensive plan recommended to reduce that unless there's a reason such as aquifer protection. So those are kind of the pertinent recommendations that affect what we're doing.
Before we go off of that, George,
Yeah.
right now, we're just, for tiny homes, the only thing we're doing is we defer to the state law.
Correct.
Should we have something in our ordinance that provides any additional information? Are we okay at this point with just the state?
I think we should add whatever's appropriate to the
We'd have to look at
land use
what
ordinance
is in
that
the
just
state.
clarifies it for
Yeah.
people.
So that's a possibility of something else that we want to do either this year or next year. Okay.
Is
Well-
there anything that comes under definition for tiny home?
Yes, state has a definition of it.
But we don't have it now.
We don't have it in our ordinance, right?
That's the kind of stuff, yes, absolutely.
Let's step back just a second. Is this gonna be affordable? What is this gonna be? What are we calling this thing? Affordable
Okay, so the
housing?
state has called the overarching umbrella of affordable housing.
Yeah.
Because they're looking at the housing crisis.
Yes.
And so but within that, they have 2 different tracks of it, actually 3. First track is official affordable housing projects. And many, many towns have adopted affordable housing policies, affordable housing ordinances, where they give developers 25, 30% more housing in a project if they make that affordable. So there are pretty much guidelines for doing that. What is affordable? How long does it have to be affordable? There's quite a long track record of regulation and process on that. So this kind of retooled some of that language about affordable housing projects. Durham isn't involved in that, so that's why I whited out anything to do with that.
Like with the economics.
Yeah, so the
aspect of
second
it.
part of this, they don't call it affordable housing in the same way, but they call it density requirements with the same goal.
Which
And-
makes more,
Yeah,
yes.
yeah, but we've been calling it affordable because the overarching LD 2003 is affordable housing.
And if we call it whatever, as long as it,
Well, pick your
Pertains.
poison. You're either going to call it affordable housing or increasing density.
well, or no, just like not increase, not like a verb like that, like just density.
Density management?
Yeah, I mean.
Just call it housing. I mean,
Because it's not really it is
Yeah.
affordable, that's
Yeah.
part of it, but it's more than that.
well, it's really, our part is not.
It doesn't
affordable.
have to be.
Exactly.
It
our
doesn't
part is
have to
not
be
economic.
affordable.
Exactly, so I guess I'm just backing up.
Increase supply.
Housing
to reduce
diversity.
demand.
Or why can't we just,
Housing diversity is the language that's in the comp plan.
okay, I like that,
Yeah.
housing diversity. I guess where I'm going is, I think tiny homes, it says in here as an accessory dwelling unit, so add it, right?
Yep.
Increase the density or a starter home, which I don't know what that really means in there, but that would be part of this, right?
Yeah.
Could
Tiny
be.
home
Yeah, I mean,
would be,
if
it
we
wouldn't be
wanted to make it
something
part of this,
separate.
yeah,
It
it
would be
could-
a separate ordinance perhaps, maybe, but it would be part of this thing that we're working on.
It'd be a separate section of the ordinance, but it's all in the land use
It's all
ordinance.
in whatever we're talking about here,
Yeah.
Should be,
guess.
yeah.
right?
And starter home is probably not the right term because somebody may want to downsize. Starter home is
Right,
your first home.
right, yeah,
So-
that's why I was,
So I don't think we have to use exact.
And again, that's not
No,
ordinance
no, I
language,
was-
it's just concepts.
Yep.
yeah.
Yeah.
So this is an umbrella, it's
Yeah.
not, we're not focusing really, we don't have to focus on just what the state has put in front of us.
Correct.
It's kind of,
That's the bottom line. You have to do what
Yeah.
the state has
Okay.
said.
thank you.
Okay? So move on from the comprehensive
Sure, I'm sorry, I
plan
just
slide,
wanted
yeah?
Mention tiny homes.
Okay, so here is LD 2003, chapter 672 in graphic form. This was part of their guidance document DECD produced like last April. No, it wasn't April, it was like around June or something. And so basically that law says that if you have an empty lot, which is the top. Okay, so right here, okay, I'm keeping it on, it's actually clear, so I'll just explain it.
Okay,
Okay, so you can see the graphics.
Yeah.
So if you got a vacant lot, if it's not in a growth area, which Durham has no growth areas, then you can either build one house, single house unit house on it, or two. It's up to you. Now Durham already allows duplexes. The state says everybody has to allow duplexes on a vacant lot. And if it's in a growth area, then you have to allow 3 units or 4 units, depending on whether it's in a designated growth area of a comprehensive plan community, or if it's not, if it's within an area served by public water and sewer, you have to allow 3 or 4 units on every lot.
But that doesn't pertain to us since we don't have a growth
Correct.
area.
Yep. And then if there is at least one existing residential unit on a lot down below, then you have to allow and one additional unit within, that's what this represents, within the existing structure or attached to it or standalone accessory structure. So you can either add 1 or you can add 2. And again, you can have 1 attached, 1 detached, or you can have 1 within it and 1 detached, or any combination is what the law
And the
says.
blue house assumes you already have one
Correct.
inside the house, the second floor.
One,
apartment.
the blue is 1 unit, and then you're adding 2. And so this is a total of 3. So you got 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3.
Okay, I see the 2.
That's what
I
that
got you.
represents. Okay, so that's LD 2003. And what I provided to you tonight is based on the input that the DECD took on this concept and this language from the law. They received 185 public comments on it. during their multiple meetings from about 35 or 40 different entities, planning board chairs, town planners, code enforcement officers, select board members. They took in all this comment and plus discussed it with the Attorney General's office and made the changes that are in this document that I mentioned earlier. So that is the law. It goes into effect July 1st unless there's a legislative delay. So going back to where we left off before the town meeting, we had discussed over the last year.
Before you leave there,
Yeah.
George, one of the things that we might want to discuss is the top thing where, you got a empty land that says you must require two units.
Must allow two.
We may want to say, if this is the direction we want to go, we can allow 3 units. That you say that on empty land, you could put, if that's the way we want to go. But those are the kinds of things that we get into the nitty gritty on this. We should be prepared to give George guidance on and include or not in the changes.
Okay. Any other questions on this one? Okay, so current zoning, as I've explained, and this illustrates a 2-acre lot, you can do a single family, and you can do 1 accessory apartment for a total of 2 units. On a 2.5-acre lot, you can do a duplex, 2 full-size units. The accessory apartment has to be no bigger than 50% of the floor area of the main unit. And that can either be inside the unit, just like the state model, attached to, or in a standalone accessory building. So this concept here shows a single-family home with a attached garage, and then a second garage or barn with an apartment over it. That's what the current zoning allows.
That's what our zoning is.
This is what our current zoning is. Okay? So
On a 2-acre lot.
on a 2-acre lot, that's
Or
correct.
2.5 for duplex.
Or 2.5 for a duplex, right. Okay, so minimum compliance with the new state law. This is what we looked at last summer. I prepared these graphics, and obviously there's been some minor tweaking of it, but it's substantially the same. And so on a developed lot, you must allow 3 units, which can be 2 single families and an accessory, or any of those combinations. But you have to, on a developed lot, you have to allow 2 more units in some configuration. On a vacant lot, you have to allow 2 units. And there's some confusion still, which I need to clarify with the state, of whether those have to be attached. There's some information from them that says they have to be attached, but then the language of the rules seem to indicate it could be standalone as well. So I've got to clarify that. But that's basically minimum compliance with the new law. Okay, so options that we discussed and did a citizen survey on, which we'll go over the results again.
And that's the way we were generally heading when we stopped, was
Yeah.
the option 1.
Right. So just to review that again, the idea of option 1 is to give more diverse housing, but try to keep it within the character of the community, the rural character, which is a comprehensive plan goal, as well as to fit within the neighborhoods. And so by limiting it to accessory apartments, many of which fit within the existing structures, either the single family or an accessory building, and then simply allowing an accessory apartment to be added to a duplex, which you don't, is going to be more conducive to fitting in with the character of the neighborhood than allowing 3 standalone houses on the same lot. So that's the comprehensive plan option in concept. Then option 2 is to just go with what the state says you have to do and don't try to control the design. If someone wants to put 2 standalone single families on the same lot right beside each other, that's their prerogative. Similarly, if they want to put another single family home on the same lot with the barn and the accessory apartment, they should be able to do that. So that's
The state law says if it fits, you can put 3 single family
correct.
on that 2 acres.
Right.
If it fits.
Well, you'd already have 1, because if not, you
You'd
only
have
get
2
2.
more. That's the way I read it, is single family plus single family plus
Plus
an
1
accessory.
accessory, plus 1
Yeah,
accessory.
so it
right.
could be 3
Yeah, you could add two more,
Two single-
theoretically, two more single-family homes.
And I think it's important, since people at home are maybe listening, that's if they fit. I mean, you still have to meet
The
all the
septic and
setbacks, and you have the
Mhm.
septic
Mhm.
rules and water and all those other
Can we go
kinds
back
of
to
things.
the first one real quick? The one right before this, sorry. So another thing we're changing here, yes, well, you have it on here, but just in my brain is.
Drop it to 2 acres.
Exactly, duplexes are on 2 acres.
Yep.
Yeah, okay.
Okay. So that's what we called last year, option 2, which is the minimum compliance with the new law. And then option 3, the new law does allow you to increase the lot size when you add these units. So and the only stipulation on it is you can't require more for the second or third units than you require for the first unit. So if you do 2 acres, your first one, you could require them to have an extra half acre, like Durham has done for duplexes. You could require them to have an extra acre, acre and a half, or 2. You can't require them to have 3 acres for the extra units. So one of the concepts that we tested with the public in our survey and in our public process was to say, the state says you can do this. This would require a lot more land for all of these extra units and theoretically limit the numbers that people could do. So that was what we called maximum restriction with the new law. And this configuration isn't necessarily the maximum, and we need to look at that in terms of, this shows adding 2 acres for the requirement for the scenario of a single family with the accessory apartments or standalone, and then 4 acres. So this is based on requiring 2 acres per unit, but you can't put that limitation on accessory apartments. So the one on this one here, that has 1 single family at 2 acres, second single family at 2 acres, but the state law prohibits requiring 2 acres for the accessory apartment.
Just for the accessory apartment. So if
Correct.
they had 3
They had 3, it'd go to
standalone,
6
you could go to
acres. You
6,
could go to 6 acres.
or something less. So you could do
Yeah.
2 acres for the house, and then 1 acre and 1 acre, or.
Yep.
Just
You have the authority and flexibility to do.
Just couldn't be 2 acres
Just
plus
can't
4
go
acres
over
plus
that.
4
Can't
acres.
go
Okay.
over that minimum lot size.
Should that say single family dwelling 4 acres under the option 3 or no? Or are you just showing, see up there,
Yeah, per single family.
per single family? We're just saying,
Yeah,
okay.
That's right. And it's not necessarily.
I see, 2 plus 2, yeah.
Yeah.
So we're just assuming-
Okay. So then, the survey, right? So we tested this with the public. First, we asked, what are your concerns? And the concerns were, we tried to give free, equal input on 2 different tracks of concern. The first were people concerned about diversity of housing. And children might not be able to afford to live in Durham anymore when they graduate, when they go off and start their own families. People are concerned about that, as well as aging parents being able to move back and have the support of their children. And so there was a strong concern, or a leaning toward concern, in terms of those 2 issues. And then on the flip side of it, many people, we've heard it lots of occasions, are concerned that whenever you add houses, you increase my taxes. And so we wanted to give fair consideration of that concern, as well as rural character. And so you can see a little bit stronger response on those issues than the diversity of housing issues. But all were there. And then in terms of the options, almost an even split between people that wanted to see the town be less restrictive or neutral at the very least, and then people who wanted the town to be more restrictive. Yep. So options for moving
You're
forward.
charging my absence.
Okay.
Options for moving forward. So first would be to simply draft the land use ordinance amendments to track the Chapter 672 requirements as finalized in the rule and goes into effect July 1st. So go back and go with option 2, basically. That's the simplest. Then you don't have to try to decide, should it be 1 acre, 1.5 acres, 2 acres, all of that confusion potential. You could just say, look, we're just going to keep it simple and we're just going to go with what the state says, no more, no less. Second would be to develop a hybrid response to address the comprehensive plan goals and the citizen concerns that you heard in the, so you want to go with increasing diversity, but you also want to try to dampen the net impact on the community. So what you would do in that process of trying to develop a hybrid would be to flesh out the details of all three models, to test those details and options with the community like we did last. So it'd be even more detailed than it was in the last iteration. And then decide on a set you want to present at town meeting and then draft the ordinance amendments that would do that. So the real question for tonight is, do you want to go forward with trying to develop a hybrid response and all of its concomitant complexities? Or do you want to keep it as simple as possible and just run with what the state has told you to have to do, get that codified in our ordinance so there's no confusion about which do you follow, and just call it a day?
Well, I would think the hybrid response, we're addressing the concerns that the people voiced when they responded to the survey. Sorry, it's one of those things that if you put out a survey and you're listening to the people, I would think that you would want to go in that direction.
I guess the thing that worries me the most is if we try and go down the more complicated route and in the end we can't pass it, then we just have nothing in our ordinance that addresses the law, which means it's still up to interpretation of Alan Plummer, whoever has to enforce it.
Is it right? Then we're back to square one again.
Right. So like maybe it makes sense to even do it two-pronged, which is do the simple one and say, hey, this is basically the law, we want something in, and then change it later. But that is in the end still more work.
And we won't get the pushback.
Does that need to be voted on? The state, like, so say they pass this thing, do we need to vote on that, or we're under the,
It goes into
it
effect
goes
July
into
1st.
effect,
Right.
so regardless,
Regardless of what you do.
regardless.
Code officer
yeah,
has to
so
follow it.
It's in there,
Right.
and then we would just have to revise our ordinances to fit that,
Well, it would be good to do that. You
right? So
don't
that
have to.
so that everyone knows.
But your ordinance is
what's-
going to say you can't do it, and
And we
the
can do
law
it, so
says
we'll
you
have
can
to
do it, which is a formula for chaos.
It's kind of like the tiny homes now, I think they're issuing tiny home permits because the state says you have to, and so we want to clean it up.
What if we just, do both, do the bare minimum, that's option one. We have to do it if they pass it, at least, and then also do the hybrid, and then people vote on that. Right?
Well, at least going into the next stage of the fall summit, I think that would be advisable. And then as the town did last year, when it had two options for resource protection, the final analysis and decision was to drop one of them. And you could do that here too. You could come in and have this is the bare minimum.
Yeah.
Put that on, like that's what we were going to do, right?
Yeah.
And then the select board would make the final call on, do we put two on or just one?
I like a hybrid that was, so right now, we believe that we allow a single family and an apartment. And I guess we believe, or that we haven't seen significant problems with that on 2 acres.
The law of Durham says you can do
Yeah,
that.
the ordinance.
It's been done for a long time.
And so we haven't had, I don't think, big problems with that.
No.
Could we then say, okay, if you want to go to a third unit, you would have to go, so you could keep the single family and, well, if you wanted to add a second unit other than an accessory unit, because the accessory unit is in a footprint that exists, garage
Or attached to it.
or attached to it. So
Yeah.
then say, okay, if you do an accessory unit in a single family house, it can stay at 2 units. If you want to do
2 acres, you mean?
2 acres, I'm sorry, 2 acres. But if you want to do a single family home and a single family home and a single family home, pick a number that makes sense, not necessarily 6, but 3 or 4. So you would say for each additional unit you add, a single family, you add an acre to the requirement. We could do that if I
Yes.
understood this right.
Yes.
So I say, okay, you've got a single family house and I want to take my house as an example. Maybe I want a second floor, make that into an apartment.
Mhm.
And so I could live with, and that was 2 acres. We could live with that. If it was another apartment above my garage, which is already working on 2 acres, I guess I'd like to see it stay. Not that I'm not planning to do this with my house, folks, but you could say, okay, that's still 2 acres because it's an accessory unit to the building. But if I want to take my house and then a single family house, and I'd have to have 4 acres, 1 acre for each additional single family standalone. Is that legit?
That's option 3 right now, essentially, from what we were saying.
Yeah,
except
it's
for
the
option
hybrid.
two. Yeah.
And the state has said you can do that.
So that's kind of what I think that maybe that resolves, I think the difference though is we would not, under my idea, we would not necessarily increase it for an apartment.
We can't increase it for an apartment, is my understanding.
Correct.
We could not. So if we, so
You can't
basically
increase
it only,
the
the only way you can increase, correct, that's right.
Full size units.
It would, so we'd end up with potentially 4 acres needed. If you wanted to do, already had a single family and you wanted to add 2 single family houses, you would need 1 acre for each single family house.
Yep.
That's legit.
Yep.
Up to 2 acres per single family house.
Correct.
Yes, but I don't know if we'd want to get to 6 acres.
But just on that note, how would that be changing what we've got now? I'm probably missing everything, but right now we've got, you can put 1 house and accessory on a 2 acre lot,
Yes,
right? So if we wanted to add another house, we'd have to add
an acre
1 acre
Or 2
One-
acres.
or 2.
or 2, but I mean,
But
my
that's-
hybrid version is 1
But
acre.
that's how it is now.
No,
No, you can't add the third.
you can't add a
Yeah.
second house on
Can't add a
a 2
detached
acre lot.
dwelling under our current ordinance.
No, I know, if you had more acres, you could.
Not on the same lot.
Oh.
You have to create a
So,
separate lot.
My 20 acres, I couldn't do that. I could only do an apartment.
And that's where
above the
back
garage.
lots come in.
Even if you have 20 acres?
Yeah, and that's where back lots come in because people have to create road frontage for the second lot. You have to create a completely separate lot. And that has to meet the minimum lot size of 2 acres and it has to have 300 feet of road frontage. To put it on, you can't put 2 houses on the same lot.
But you can make a new lot,
Yes,
but
Yeah.
If you got all the road frontage and all the other,
I see, sorry.
Yeah.
Yes, okay, gotcha, sorry, so it is changing it quite a bit, okay.
so that's kind of my thought is my hybrid would be if you have somebody who already, maybe a good example, somebody already has that and they want to add a tiny home or a single family home, they'd have to add, and they have to have 1 additional acre. They'd have to have at least 3 acres for that additional, and maybe 4 if they wanted to do 3 single family homes. And, or some combination thereof. I mean, that's my thought process. And I think also if they're gonna just add another apartment, I'm not sure that maybe they couldn't live with 2 acres. But this is all open for discussion. That's just.
well, state
my-
again says, although,
You couldn't,
yeah, if you add
another apartment,
2 accessory apartments.
you can't, I can't.
No, and this is where part of the confusion is, which is again, if you go anything beyond the state law, then you got to start mixing and matching what Durham allows, what the state allows, what this part of the state allows, and it's more complicated. But you got to work through those issues.
But I think back to what you were saying from the beginning, like if this doesn't, whatever we come up with, a hybrid, if that doesn't pass, where are we? So that's where, like, if we just develop a base ordinance for if this doesn't pass, just in case.
Oh, an option B.
And when it comes down to the decision of the select board, let's say you come up with 2 different proposals. One is to do the hybrid. The other is to just go with the state law. So just to avoid confusion, like with the resource protection, you may come out and say, look, let's just put the hybrid on this ballot.
Yeah.
If it fails, the state law is in effect.
And we already have the thing
And
drafted.
then next year, we will just put that on the ballot to say, look, this is the state law and we're just making it clear by putting it in
And
the
then,
ordinance.
actually then, if you're saying if this fails, then next year we
Yep.
put it on, then we don't have to draft it this year, I guess.
It's already drafted.
Or we can. What I'm saying is if, we can focus just on this. If we're waiting a whole nother year, we can draft it in that year. Do you know what I'm
Possibly,
saying?
yeah.
Like, we don't have to focus on that really, if that's what
But the
you're
other good
saying,
thing about
right.
that is then that compares them. Look, here's what we're talking about. When you go into the fall public participation.
Instead of two options, like here's
Yeah.
this, what you're voting on here, but this is,
Yeah.
yeah, so have one complete,
Because I think
Cumulative.
where or what I can't remember the color, but I think what a lot of people were, you had option 1, option 2, and then option 3, which was 51 or 52, whatever it was,
Mhm.
percent of the vote. They just wanted bigger lots.
Yeah.
I mean, so my 1 extra acre may not satisfy the bloodlust out there for bigger lots. Because I think a lot of them would say, okay, let's get rid of 2 acres per lot. Let's go to, you have to have at least 4 acres to do that. So that's where it may fail. My idea of a hybrid may fail, is that there's not enough, the additional lots are not big enough.
Yeah.
In some people's mind.
When it comes down to it, like, it's like we do 1 acre or 2 acre or whatever. And if we don't vote this in for the people that have the bloodlust for larger
yeah,
lots,
exactly.
you say this is what's going to happen. So
Yeah.
if you want to push to bigger,
Can,
this is the direction
as
we
a
can go.
as a town official or planner or professional planner, can we change the terminology from
Bloodlust, I like
bloodlust
it.
to land lust
Land
or
lust.
open space lust?
Maybe just get rid of lust.
Okay,
So I
let's vote
think,
to change my minutes. But
I think that's a really good point. I think that's one thing we could flesh out early, possibly, is that issue there.
And I think, again, if the public information thing would be if we, in October, whenever we're ready to present it, the people come out and say, no, we don't want 1 additional acre, we want 6 additional acres, or what a max that we could have is 2 additional acres, whatever it be. We want to go as big as we can. And I've thrown that, and I may be wrong. I mean, I think there's a lot of people who want to recognize there's a housing shortage and want to do something. I just think the fear was 3 houses on 2 acres was not 3 units, whatever you want to call it. on 2
And I think that concept of a hybrid that we've talked about so far would address all the concerns in the survey. So for people that want more housing diversity, it allows the accessory apartments to meet that need. And for people that are concerned with the impact on the town, increasing the lot sizes for full-size units dampens that, because it's going to drive people in the other direction of the accessory apartments if they have to add 2 acres for every one of those standalone units, which are going to have much more impact on the visual character of the community. So I think the hybrid can address both sets of public concerns.
And there were a couple of people that approached me during the process last fall. And the one guy in particular, I remember from the election, said, this is great. Option 3 is great because I have, don't quote me on the number, 20 acres up front, 80 acres in the back. And I can't build a house for my son
Right.
because I can't do it and I guess he didn't have enough frontage or whatever the issue was. So he'd have to spend $100,000 to get back to that 80 acres back there. And one of these, what he was saying is, I'd like to do this. And when I said, well, it can only be 50, maybe what if it's only 50%? Fine, I'll move there and my son can take the big house. So I think there is a interest need in a standalone, there's lots of folks out there who want a smaller house for mom and dad, or a house for the kids, whatever we want to call it. So, it's not just a matter of, I think there's a lot of interest if you sold it that way. And I'm not saying that, I'm not trying to prejudice the decision here.
Well, no, we need to make this pass. Like, we need to make it
That-
so that the public wants
Well,
this.
don't we need to give the direction to George on this?
That's what I'm asking. Yeah,
Yeah.
that's good.
Wow.
Well, no, so I'm thinking out loud, what if we are one of those towns that is omitted? We have 3 things. We could go by the state, we could do this, or there might not be anything at all. But we're trying to get this thing passed.
Correct.
for this, the comp plan,
Yeah.
right? So we need to make sure that we do hear everybody.
Yeah,
that
and
we
I
make this
think-
option.
My guess is not, I've been here, the reason it's in the comp plan to expand it is there was a outcry in 2018 for more additional units.
And it's even worse now
Yes, even
in
worse now.
23, right?
And I had a couple older, people even older than me, come up and say, there's no place for me to live in Durham. There's no place for me to downsize to
Yeah.
in Durham. Well, this may give you an option to take your property, build something and sell, do whatever.
So with all that being said, I think our direction to George is let's go forward with number 2.
Hybrid. I would
Right.
agree.
I agree,
Okay.
I'm good.
because we have the option to fall back on the state if that doesn't pass.
Yes.
Yeah.
But at the same time, it's meeting the goals that those that responded to the survey. Granted, it was a small percentage, but still.
I mean, we heard them loud and clear at the open house that we had, the public
Yeah.
hearing. So what's the next step here?
So the next step is for me to start fleshing out the details of all 3 models.
Do we want to?
Into one? So what do you?
No. So what I do is, okay, we've got comprehensive plan recommendation as
Yep.
presented. We've got the minimum state requirements. Slide
Yep.
for option 2. And then we've got increase the lot sizes.
Yep.
And so what I would do is look at more detail of the option for comprehensive plan with accessory apartments under the new law stipulations, make sure it meets that. And then secondly, for minimum state law, clarifying some things. So for example, and I held this off. Okay, so this is another one of their graphics, and I will zoom in on this one because now we're going to be talking about the language as opposed to the concepts. So this is something that I need to clarify with DECD because, can you see that?
Yeah.
Okay, so their graphic that they prepared last year, and they're updating this booklet, the guidance document, said on land with 0 existing units outside a growth area, which is all of Durham, up to 2 dwelling units if attached. But there's language in here that says they can either be standalone or attached. So
It's contradicting.
it's contradictory. So I need to clarify that. Where in this language do you get that? And then similarly, on land with 2 existing units, no new structures may be built unless allowed under local ordinance. So if you have a duplex lot anywhere in Durham, their interpretation of the state law says they don't get any more units unless the town decides to give it to them.
Not even accessory dwelling units.
Yeah, so I need to clarify that and then apply it into the 3 different models.
And again, even if that's what they intend, we could just say, we would like, if there's nothing on there, we'd like to have 3, we'd like to allow 3 dwelling
Yeah.
units. But not, it says you must allow at least 2, we could, if we wanted to, say 3.
So what I need to do is I need to put all of these models through the sieve of this new final rule and see what, make sure that what we're doing meets this. And I've already conceptually run that through the DECD and they said, yes, conceptually it was workable, which is that email that I copied for you tonight. But now, we got to get into the details and when they see the details, they may say, well, wait a minute, this part of it doesn't work. So that's what I call fleshing out.
Well, and there's 2 questions I would have is, what other things do we want to give George guidance on, that as he's drafting this up, that, and I didn't, on top of my head, do we need to talk about backlots? If it's a backlot, they're allowed to put whatever we decide, that they could do it on the backlot as well as they could.
Yeah, so we'll have to change that language in the backlot
Oh, yeah.
part.
Yes. Oh, then the other question, George, that you brought up yesterday was does 3 units kick in the subdivision ordinance?
I was going to ask that.
Okay,
Oh,
so
no,
you
no,
add,
no.
I go to the next slide,
Subdivision.
Okay.
which is
what I was-
additional considerations. So I mentioned following up with the DECD on clarifications and consider subdivision law requirements. So The issue is the new law does not exempt people from subdivision.
I
And
saw
if you
that.
create 3 units, whether it's 3 lots or 3 housing units within a single 3-year period, by law, both state and local, you have to get a subdivision approval of that, which is basically throwing at someone all of the same standards that Deer Creek Crossing had to meet in all the submissions, unless you grant waivers. So 2 different ways that'll come down is that if somebody's looking to add 2 more units to their single family, then we're going to tell them you might have to wait 5 years for that next one, unless you want to go through this process. And there is another option. It's a little bit less onerous, not completely, but the law says you have to put them through subdivision review process unless the town has a site plan review ordinance and process that's equally covers the same issues of drainage, traffic, and all those things. So site plan review, which we have in our ordinance, is a little bit, it covers all of the same basic areas, but it limits the scope of it to, the construction of the units as opposed to all the other things. And so that would be a possibility.
We did that already for accessory apartments, right?
Well, right now you can't hit 3 with this because you can only add 1 accessory apartment. But now if you're going to add 2 accessory apartments, so let's say you moved to Durham, and in order, because this happens all the time, in order to be able to afford to live in Durham, you say, when I buy that single family, I want to create 2 accessory apartments for income. I'm going to renovate the building anyway, so I'll add an accessory apartment. It's a fairly big house. I'll put an accessory apartment in the daylight basement, and I'll put an accessory apartment over the garage, and then I'll be able to afford to live here. Well, that's 3, unless you've lived there 5 years, if you're just buying it, that's creating 3 units in a 5-year period. You got to go to the planning board for subdivision.
Right now, when someone comes in for an accessory apartment, do we go through, do they just go see the CEO?
Correct.
Okay, and does he run through all of those conditions, not conditions,
He doesn't. No, he
standards?
doesn't have to. All he has to look at, does the septic system
We used
big
to do
enough?
that.
Well, okay, so here's how that works. As long as the unit is no greater than 50% the size of the existing or the remaining primary dwelling unit,
Mhm.
the code officer can approve it. If it exceeds that, you have to go to the planning board as a conditional use. That's the ones that you used to review.
Okay, attached or unattached?
Correct.
Okay.
Well, there can be no unattached unless it was a garage or something. Right?
So let's say, for example, and I personally experienced this in Falmouth. Okay, I bought a split level and wanted to create the lower level as a separate apartment. And it was both unit, the 1,200 square feet per floor. And the maximum in Falmouth was 800 feet.
Mhm.
So I've got 1,200 feet. How do I cut off 400 square feet from the lower level? But they had just changed the zoning to allow the 2 full units.
Yeah.
So in the case, if that was in Durham, the code officer would say, you can't have it any more than 800 square feet based on the percentages, but you can go to the planning board for conditional use review. They have the authority to allow the full size.
What if it's separate lots? Can we say that? Like the subdivision separate lots,
But
right?
it's also separate units.
Right, but when someone just adds in an accessory apartment, that's not a separate lot, it's a separate unit.
And they don't have to come unless under the new law, either forced on you or you decide to do it for the comprehensive plan. If they create the 3rd unit, they could be triggering subdivision.
But so subdivision says unit or lot. Is that
Yes,
right?
Exactly.
Okay,
That's different.
okay.
Well, and the question I guess I would have is, should we ask George, as he's drafting this up, to say that if it's a basement apartment and an above the garage, so it's 2 accessory units, can we go with just subdivision, sketch plan,
Site plan review.
site plan review, and not go through
Absolutely.
preliminary and other,
I would absolutely be in favor of drafting something that covers these people that are gonna be doing this. That doesn't mandate them go through subdivision.
Yeah, I'm
Right.
with you.
Like something, whatever we have to do.
Yeah, I mean,
Like if we have to do a site plan review or,
Yeah.
something.
I would personally want that, but I also I feel like if it's still to, like, we want to have the ability to have growth, but not go crazy, then maybe one way to restrict that is sort of burden of paperwork by saying if you do suddenly go to 3, you will trigger subdivision.
Oh,
And that would sort of, and then they can wait 5 years to build the third unit, but it would also be a way to stymie growth over a longer period of time.
Or pace the growth.
Wait, yeah.
I mean, if that's one of your
oh, I
goals.
see. Yeah, I mean, that could also be a question to the public, right?
Yes, I mean, my thought would be, we would, if we could, if it's in or close, if it's an attached unit, or it's in the basement, or it's above a garage, what do we gain? I guess, what do we gain by doing a full blown, so you got a basement and you got above a garage, what have you gained other than, in my opinion, harassing the guy and saying, you want to do that? We're going to make it a lot more expensive to you. And I personally am not in favor of that. But if it's I'm more comfortable with an apartment doing 2 apartments or 2, whatever, doing just site plan review, because it is a pretty thorough thing, and they still got to come up with a plan, and but otherwise we're going to ask for, well, let's just see your drainage plan. Let's see, and things that I don't know that are necessary for an additional.
Well, just so other towns have dealt with this and the issue of site plan review, and just so you understand why the state does that, is because think about a 200 unit apartment complex, which is one lot. The impact of that compared to a 13 lot single family subdivision on a community on all the issues. So the state law was revised to say, whether by lot, sale, lease, or otherwise, if you create more than 3 units, you have to get a subdivision approval. And so then in response to that, towns said, well, wait a minute, we're going to put this project through 2 complete separate reviews. So they said, they got an amendment to the law that said, look, if your site plan review of that apartment complex checks all the same boxes, you only have to have one process, and that would be the site plan review process. That's how it all came to there. But dealing with it on a second accessory apartment doesn't make any sense.
Yeah, and I think
But
it
that's
goes.
that's what's behind the law.
This, right?
Yeah.
Like making it easier.
So back to where I was going with that. Some communities, when they are doing the issues of site plan review, they delegate to a staff review committee minor projects. So theoretically, you could put it into the ordinance, a expedited process for review of accessory apartments or residential units, and define what the parameters of that. And so the code officer, planner, fire chief could basically do the delegation of that and then the person wouldn't have to go through the whole planning board process.
I mean, site plan review, I think, could be somewhat quick, right?
Well, I mean, if you got it, I'm not off the top of my head, but what are we asking them to provide at site plan?
We're looking at septic, we're looking at roads, which is something I want to talk about, driveways, we're looking
Site
at
plan,
both
lighting.
Site plan.
So somebody's paying an engineer to do that. I mean, we're not going to
Yeah.
just accept a hand-drawn sketch. So there is some additional for that third unit,
survey.
the survey. There's a whole bunch
Do they
of
need to do
additional,
that for accessory apartment with the CEO,
No,
not for the one.
right?
And I guess what I'm saying is if it's just an apartment, why go through that, in my opinion, not roll. Now, a standalone house, there's some different issues in my opinion, with that in terms of site location. I would be probably fine with just doing.
so
site plan
here's
review.
just a thought, looking at, wow, this is mushrooming. But what you could do is just not address that this round. Go through if people over the next year want to go forward with their third unit all at once, they're going to have to go through the subdivision review, and you waive whatever you think is appropriate or not. And then for the next round,
Maybe,
put this expedited site plan review, because many people will have a hard time with that.
yeah.
Wait a minute, I don't get notice of
Yeah.
that. It doesn't go to the planning
Yeah.
board.
That's a good point. There's gonna be some issues that come out of this.
Yeah.
Right, and so we're gonna have some stuff to do. Or did you have the question, you're not sure what this law is regarding subdivision, or are we certain that
It's
if
certain.
there's certain, it
Oh,
has
yeah.
to go through subdivision?
And I think we're speaking out both sides of our mouth, because we said we want to increase housing opportunities, but we want to make it harder to do that.
That's why I was thinking throw it to the public, right? That does kind of follow along the larger
Yeah,
I
acreage.
think
My thought would be write it up for consideration, not punt it to the next round. Because there are people gonna come in and wanna do, I don't know how many are gonna wanna do 3. But if we as a group say we want to make it maybe not easy, we wanna make sure we've got something good. So my idea would be, if it's 3 apartments in the same footprint as what exists today, do you really need to go through site plan? You do have septic checks and all that other kind of stuff. If it's a standalone house way over here or whatever, then go through just site plan review, and here's what we've got to do, or what you have to do to, that's would be my recommendation of what George writes up.
So you're advocating addressing it in this
The
round.
only
Yeah.
issue with that I see is that we're going to have to get into the nitty gritty and be like, okay, if your standalone house is larger than this, then you do have to go through subdivision or whatever. If it's less than this, we'll have to figure out those details.
My thought is, if it's a standalone house, it just goes to subdivision, site plan review.
And if what about detached?
Well, I'm
I'm
referring to,
detached apartment or detached.
if it's in the, and I don't know how easy this is to write up, but at least to consider if I wanted to do it at my house. So I make my second floor an apartment, I make the shed or the barn an apartment. That's all in the existing footprint. So I don't know why we wanted somebody to go through a real complicated, 6-month process. Assuming they get their Corps of Engineers, all those other kinds of things that we're gonna ask for, that becomes a 6 or 8 month. And we haven't made increasing housing opportunities easier. We've made them harder. I mean, that's my thought. We'd ask George to write something up to try and address my thought. And before we even get to the public, you guys may say, that's the dumbest idea we've ever heard. We want that third unit to be harder to get.
my concern is if, like, say someone's really on board with the hybrid model that George and we come up with, and then they see the complicated language in like, well, if it's this and this, you don't need a site review, but if it's this and this, you need a site plan review, and if you do this, it's a subdivision review, and they disagree with that, then the whole thing
And
fails.
then they vote
So
no.
then-
As a town,
Yeah, I kind of like the idea of maybe, when the question comes up, because it will during the review, that we are gonna take these on a case-by-case basis and maybe some we can just punt to the site plan review and some we can punt to the
Well, I mean, you
subdivision,
could
or-
administratively come up with, like, you have the authority to grant the waivers on virtually everything. What you could do is we could come up with an administrative guideline for you to review and approve to say, look, if this condition comes in, here's what we require for these subdivision reviews of accessory apartments
Mhm.
or standalone single family.
Yeah.
And so we want to see this, you go right through the list in your subdivision ordinance of submission requirements. And then basically you just check off all the boxes when you do your standard subdivision review process.
so you would be talking about only the third unit, the second accessory.
Right. Third
Right,
unit,
right.
third unit triggers it.
I mean, I just don't see if they're doing a true accessory unit, what on the site has changed from what exists today.
But I think in the model suggested here, if it came to us, we'd say, oh, okay, nothing's really changed, like, great, like, we
Yep.
do a waiver and it moves on.
So
Until we
even
eventually get
before
the
they
language.
submitted an application. So they've got to rely upon the planning board at
But
that
you
time.
could say, this is what we want you to, what we want to be submitted for these applications.
Mhm.
And have a revised checklist for accessory
Things
apartments.
that make sense for
Yeah.
For the
this type
third-
of
Say,
thing.
this is
Second
what the
apartment.
planning board has decided they're gonna apply to these units. And therefore, you need to go to the planning board to get the subdivision approval for the third unit. But this is all you need to submit.
And that's, I would say, just as a stopgap, so we don't bite off more than we can chew to getting the hybrid model
And
through.
actually, that could cover something else, roads, so driveways, which could be an issue if you have 3 houses on one parcel, and you've got who knows how many driveways coming out of there. So like the site access and all of that stuff, that could be an issue that we could cover in that. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
With,
Yeah, you could
so that
require
is
them
one
to
thing
have a
that we would want to
combined,
review possibly.
Yeah.
You know,
they
so,
have to have a combined driveway.
right, or.
Yep.
Yeah, I mean, I
something
think
like
that could be, in my mind, as we're dealing with private roads now, is that is the, administrative, the fire chief and the road commissioner believe that your drive can handle the fire truck. I mean, I don't know that the road commissioner cares about your driveway.
Well, yeah. I don't know if we want 3 driveways coming out of one lot, one parcel. I don't know.
Well, they'd have to, if they did that,
State's not gonna allow you to do it on the highways.
and Calvin's probably not gonna allow you to do it on the non-highways, because you gotta have X distance, site distance, and X distance between them. But we could, those are the kinds of things I think that as we're going through the summer, we need to think of and lay out. Because the other issue the bigger issue with me is rentals or sale. Can we limit it to rentals? Because sales, you get into the whole, or do we want to go the condominium route?
Oh.
What do we want to do for?
You mean like selling one house on one lot? The
Yes,
same
so
lot,
if you had a
and
standalone house, do you somehow, you can't parcel it loose, but you could create I think.
Houseominium.
A condominium, house, whatever.
What they call them.
Or you just limit it to rentals.
They both own the lot, but they own their individual units separately. Houseominiums.
So the ground is the original guy. And so do we just want to say, we don't want to go down that road? Let's just go with rentals? I mean, that's, again, we don't need to decide
Again,
that
I don't know
tonight.
that you can dictate that you can tell them you can't do that.
Why not? Does it say we can't? I mean, I say it's a good idea, but I didn't read anything that said,
Well, they may have a legal right to do it. They may have to get a subdivision approval or not to do it.
I mean, you start talking about sell and breaking off lots, and I'm a whole lot
But
more
really,
in
we need
favor
some
of-
input from legal counsel.
Yeah, I mean, I guess that's something I'd like us to consider. We don't need to decide it tonight, but that's the other big question I've got and that has come up with a couple of the councilmen, are these going to be sales or leases? Because I think they had a concern about the sale.
A former select board member had.
Yeah,
that.
but I mean, but he's still a citizen. And so I think he brought that up.
But if it comes up during the public process, then
Well, I'm bringing it up now. I mean, I'd like to have that going in to the decision in October. If we can't limit it, then we can't.
be prepared at least to respond to it.
Yeah, I mean, I think we should. I think that would save a lot of issues down the road.
Another question I had too about subdivisions is, they aren't required to follow this. Is that right? Like a subdivision?
No, if you have private covenants, that
Oh, it's just
they're
for
exempt
that.
from this.
Okay, and is there any way that we could, add it in? No. It's
What do
like
you mean?
illegal, like they have to consider this, whatever we come up with, 3.
Oh,
3 units
so, yeah.
per-
So I think one issue will be when subdivisions come in
Mhm.
under the new law, you will need to get clarification from the developer. Are you going to put a restriction on your individual lots to prohibit this, multiple units? Because if you're not, then we need to anticipate and you need to address traffic issues and other issues for multiple units. Now, realistically, septic system limitations and well limitations are going to be probably preclude it, and the market's probably going to preclude it because people in these lots that are buying into a single family subdivision are going to want a private restriction to say you can't put three
I guess
three
that's
houses.
what I was saying is, could we give them any sort of recommend, or,
Say you must do this.
Yeah.
You can address it during the subdivision review.
I mean, the
process.
cluster subdivisions, they couldn't do it if they wanted to because if they're going down to 1 acre.
Yeah.
So I mean, it just, we require at least 2, but if somebody came in with a 4 acre minimum lot, size, the question would be, do we want to? I mean, if it's 4 acres and somebody wants to rent, the second story, because what does it matter if they just 3 acres, 3 acres, 3 acres, or, going back in here is 3 acres. You see what I'm saying? It doesn't matter if the guy says, okay, I can't do it in a subdivision, but I'll do it along the road, or I'll just keep building houses. Because my experience back in the cornfields was, you're gonna make it hard for me to have a subdivision, 5 acres, 5 acres, 5. So what you got then is just a row of houses. And I think we'd like to avoid that, so the unintended consequence. So any other guidance? And I think we have multiple opportunities going forward to say, oh, by the way, I didn't think of, as George is fleshing this out over the summer, we're fleshing it out over the summer.
I think we do have to think about like access, driveways, roads, things like that. With this, we talked about this before. If there's 3 houses on one parcel, what are we going to require for that driveway? What are we going to require for all of that? But if we can cover it in the review, then I think that we won't have to think of, we were trying to think of what to put in. We might not have to do that. If that makes sense. Like we would review that.
But you may not get to review it because if somebody's doing this on a house, house that they've lived in for 5 years and they have 2 more units, it doesn't need a subdivision review.
Right. If they add 2 units after they've already lived 5 years.
If they've lived there at least 5 years, or if it's for a relative.
That's a good point. So I don't know if we think that I just can foresee some issues with driveway.
Flushing out the details.
Yeah, so that's just something to add.
I guess I would like we started this with talking about increasing housing opportunities, and maybe we started getting off to how do we want to slow down housing opportunities? What is the basic
Yeah,
philosophy?
and I didn't do that. I guess I'm just thinking about the issues.
I was looking over at the map over there.
No, like issues as to why we do want to review these things.
Yeah.
But we do want to encourage growth for sure. I mean,
No, I
There's
agree.
also the issue of the law of unintended consequences. So I think you do need to parse some of these issues because when you get to the public process, people bringing
oh
up,
yeah,
Yeah.
and, and one that I've already anticipated, they'll say, well, wait a minute, you're increasing the lot sizes to do this, and you're allowing the units to do this. What if they do both?
what? I don't know.
Well, what I'm saying is you may get, somebody says, sure, I'll do 6 acres and I'm going to put 3 units on it. So that somebody could say, well, wait a minute, but the state law, actually one of the clarifications is you can't do double dipping. You can't do 3 units plus an accessory apartment under this part of the law. So both ways it says, if you get this bonus, you don't get the other bonus. Then we can get into that explanation later, but.
Yeah, I mean, we won't. Smart people out there who want to make money will figure out a way. You can't anticipate all those, but I think if we take the goal that we want to improve housing opportunities, and at the same time protect some of the other safety issues, road issues, and all those other, we just need to take a look at that.
Yep.
So.
So if this passes for 2 acres, you're gonna have 3 units. Are you saying if you have 4 acres, you can't have 6?
Unless you split it into 2
That's
acres.
what you mean, right? Like as far as the double dipping, like you can't.
Yeah, you
Yeah.
couldn't do 3 full-size units and then say, oh, the law says you have to allow me to do an accessory apartment too.
Right.
Well, the law specifically says if you take advantage of the 3 units, you don't also get an accessory
Got it,
unit,
yeah.
and vice
That would be a
versa,
house
and
number.
vice versa.
Okay.
So do you have enough guidance? Is there anything else you
Yeah,
want to give
I
you in
do.
terms of guidance?
And, you know, you brought up, and I know Ann brought it up last time, the issue of revisit the growth area. That's the third on this list here of additional considerations, and I would propose holding that off till the next meeting.
Like 2025 meeting.
No.
You mean April, I mean June.
June,
June.
either at the regular meeting or the workshop,
With-
depending on
with
what you
Ann.
do. Yeah, and then just for tonight's purposes, you know,
Yeah.
my parking meter is gone over.
Well, yeah,
I agree, yeah. That
I'm
was
not
one,
jumping on that one, but
I've got a presentation on that.
that was one thing I was gonna mention is I know Anne brought up some ideas
Mhm.
and I wanted to make sure that all of hers were.
Yep.
Were heard.
Prepared to do
So,
that.
she's always welcome to come to the meetings.
Yeah, so we should,
And whether she does or not, I can
Yeah.
still address her
I
issues.
wish I could remember what, I think a lot of her, it was more add acres, right? Like
Well,
make the
instead
lot
of
size-
allowing this everywhere in town, have one area of town where you allow it. I think that was her
And she,
concept.
I think, and if she's watching, she can correct me, but I think she kind of realized that was a bridge too far.
Not necessarily.
For
So
what?
I think she is, and the other issue that keeps coming up is rate of growth. Limit the number of permits per year. And I've got the same issue, address growth areas and rate of growth are they're
We can
connected.
certainly
They're
have that.
connected.
Add that
For
discussion.
is that the data?
Well, we got what,
No.
33
It's
last
can
year?
you do that? Can you limit the number of permits per year? And what do you have to do in order to do that?
And I think we've got good guidance in the comp plan. But pushing that off till next week, the other thing, since I may meet with the super summit or whatever it is, do we still want to take on solar and cell? Assuming the bandwidth is there, nobody, but is that something we want to recommend as the planning board? And is it something we want to do it all, or if the Conservation Commission is interested in solar,
They
pass
might
it
be
off-
interested in the solar aspect.
Well, I think we definitely want to do the solar because the CEO has brought that up as a concern.
Yeah, I agree.
He sees it coming, so. if
You
he
want it
wants
like-
Minister.
For June, plan on trying to schedule that for the second Wednesday of June as
The
the
summit, super summit,
and invite these other groups to come.
yeah.
No, maybe another planning board meeting?
No?
The super summit is just the chair, correct?
No, I think we're gonna be there.
Oh, I see what John is saying.
Yeah, I mean, that's not the intent of this for the super summit.
Yeah, I think John's correct. The idea is to delegate. So,
Tell me what we want to talk
Right.
about and I'll
You
take it to the
want-
super
Oh,
summit.
okay.
yeah. So
Okay.
you've already identified the issues. You haven't decided to do all
Yep.
three, but these are the ones if you do any, these are the ones you're going to do.
Yeah.
And if the Conservation Commission, the Conservation Commission decides to take on solar, then you may say, okay, then we're going to add to our plate the cell towers.
Mhm.
If they don't, then you may say, well, we need to address solar, so we're going to drop cell towers for this year
Yeah.
and just do solar.
Well, and it also depends on what else is a priority, because,
They might come up with something.
yeah, there may be something
Yeah.
that conservation or historical or Board of Appeals wants. I mean, I don't think we seem to be getting a lot of interest in solar.
Yeah.
But I don't think I haven't heard that there's cell tower guys beating down the door at this point to add one more cell tower.
Main issue there is there are people that come in monthly to put up new equipment on the existing towers.
And who do they go through? The CEO?
Code officer, yeah. And he really has very little, if any, guidance on how we're supposed to be
Is
doing
it
that.
supposed to go through? We just don't got it.
Put up a new tower, you got to do
But adding it,
condition.
there's a name for it, co-location.
Yeah,
Yeah. That's okay for the CEO to do? Like, he's not,
it's not clear. It's not clear in the
I mean, I
ordinance.
think I would support co-location because co-location means.
He's
no tower.
just giving them permits right now. And that may or may not be consistent with the ordinance in terms of the conditional use. But you don't have any details to say, yes, it is or it isn't consistent.
Yeah, I mean, I haven't heard that this is a big problem,
No.
so the great.
My
scheme of
concern
this-
is you did a conditional use review of a tower a couple of years ago, and you had very little, you had no standards. And that's not a good place to be.
Well, if nobody else wants to
With
present
town.
something, we could certainly take a look at cell towers. I guess
Yeah,
my
yeah.
point would be, it's not the same priority as
No.
maybe Board of Appeals has something or
Yeah.
whatever.
Solar is much higher
Oh, yeah.
because of the potential for them.
I also think for cells, though, there's plenty of other towns that it seems like something that could be pretty boilerplate that we wouldn't really.
Well, same with solar. I mean, Farmington has the biggest solar farm in New England.
But within that, there's a question of, I've done cell tower regulation for 40 years now. And, there's issues of visual impact analysis. It's very complicated. And how far do you want to go with that? Some require stealth, some go within the federal limits. It's a pretty complicated
The town
issue.
next to me in Indiana required it to look like a tree.
Yeah, and you require them
They
to
do.
do
I mean,
a coverage, you
at
have
the
to
end of the
require
day.
them to do a coverage analysis. It's.
Yeah, I just don't think it's the same priority as maybe some of the other stuff that
Right.
we may want
Yep.
to.
But at some point, the
maybe
town
when you,
needs to
when
do
you
it.
do have the summit, maybe encourage the, Conscom to take on solar.
Yeah, I'll
I
talk
think
to,
it
is
would
Samantha
be-
still is she still?
Um,
Jesse. Jess
No,
Costa.
she's on there, but
No,
no.
I think she's chair now. That's
She
what Joe,
is?
that's what Joe told me.
What
Joe
happened
Roy.
to,
Samantha, Sam.
yeah, sorry, Sam, you're right,
Yeah.
yeah.
I don't know.
No, okay, well, Jess is great, yeah, kind of encourage, I think they work on solar
I
projects.
mean,
a lot.
I will
So,
send it to Samantha and she can say, send it to Jess or info.
yeah,
I mean,
when you
yeah.
talk to her.
well, I've got to
on the
talk to her about
summit.
coming. My goal is, just for everybody, is to set a meeting sooner rather than later. Say these are, as an example, these are the 3 topics we've talked about as the planning board. What kinds of things, because I think it is important to let them think about what they need.
Yep.
But one of them, if I talk to, I think Barb Schneider is the chair of the planning,
Yep.
appeals board, say, Barb, this is something you may want to think about and, let's talk about that. But, and like I said, no offense in Jess or Samantha, but toad crossings may be their number 1 priority.
That's actually
It is actually a real thing, yes.
Yeah.
Actually, they're underground. Though. They're like,
Amphibian-
they use
amphibian
pipes.
wildlife
They use
crossings.
culverts.
Yeah.
I think one of our culverts is going to be toad crossable.
Dear lady.
Thank you. I need a motion.
I'll make it.
Motion to adjourn.
Well, she moved. You want a
I'll
second?
second.
It's been moved and second to adjourn. All in favor, raise your hand. 4-0. Thank you all very much. And I will keep you.
George, you can shut off the video.
The super. The super.
Thank you.
Yes, please don't say anything stupid until after George tells us the thing is out. Thank you all very much.
Have you not heard Donna the Dear Lady?
No.
This she must have just been having a bad day, but called into a radio. So they were like, call in to tell us your